listening to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network, the nonprofit organization that strives to address the staggering disparity in resource availability for individuals suffering from mental health disorders, processing disorders, addictions, trauma healing, and sexual identity challenges. Together, we strive to end the stigma associated with these challenges so that true healing can begin. Welcome back to Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network. I'm your host, Ange, and I welcome you to episode number 7. Today's podcast focuses on gender identity and mental health challenges. We are thrilled to have our guest, Rainbow, share her personal story with us today. This episode mentions trauma, abuse, transgender topics, dissociative identity disorder, multiple personality disorder, schizophrenia, and other mental health topics. If you feel triggered, we encourage you to contact your support system, therapist, national and community support groups, the Global Crisis Text Line by texting 741-741, and/or, if in the U.S., dialing 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. So, what are we waiting for? Fill up your coffee and let's get started. So today we are on episode 7 of Coffee and Conversation with Recovery Advocate Network. I am super excited to have a friend of mine join us today. She, Rainbow, who uses pronouns she, her, hers, has decided to come and have a conversation today talking about gender identity challenges and comorbid mental health challenges. And I love her story. I love her passion and how big of an advocate she is in the community. So this is really an honor. So Rainbow, do you want to kick us off and introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to talk. In case I forget at the end of my talk, I would like to express my gratitude to Rand for giving me the opportunity to share my story. This is something I wanted to do for a long time. This podcast will enable my story to live on even after I take my last breath, whenever that may be. So I'm going to talk about my gender identity challenges. Been out as a transgender female for quite some time. That has presented its own mental health challenges. I have other mental health challenges as well that I'll go into. I'm passionate about mental health because for a long, long time, I kept things secret and I always thought I was alone. And I was struggling because I felt like I was the only one suffering, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to know that you're not alone. There is help available. There are people who care. There are resources available. So that's just what I want to mention, that it took me a long time to realize that, but I'm grateful I did.
That is amazing. And so you have been able to live in this world as your true self for how long now, Rainbow?
Out as transgender?
Yes.
Oh, I'd say I'm going to go into that a tiny bit, but I'd say since 2014.
Awesome. That's amazing. Well, we're excited. So I would love for you to share your journey of being able to express how you would like to be received in the world and to live in the environment and basically to be able to live as your true self as you see. So I'd love to hear that journey, how it started, whatever history you want to provide.
Now, I want to apologize in advance. I might have said that I don't think in a linear process, so I might switch between the present and the past and the present and the past. So it may be a little bit hard to follow, but time is not linear to me. Anyway, let's start. My story will highlight several challenges I faced throughout my life. I decided to structure my talk this way since I can't see how I can compartmentalize any specific challenges since they're all interrelated. By that, I mean they all have affected each other. I will talk about my past trauma, which caused me to have several comorbid mental health disorders. I will also mention some neurological disorders I was born with that contributed to things. Lastly, I will briefly discuss my gender identity challenges as well. I now identify as transgender female. I go by female pronouns. My disclosure of being transgender was a gradual process, like it was for many other people who came out as transgender. I would say I first started coming out in about 2014. By 2018, I was at the point that I was out to everybody. Since then, I've always identified as female, and my gender expression has matched my gender identity. So I'm out, I don't hide things. I've also been an advocator or instigator, I like to say, for LGBTIQA plus rights. I've been involved in trans pride events and volunteered as a camp counselor at summer camp. I volunteered at a summer camp for kids who identify as trans, non-binary, queer, gender fluid, or just questioning their gender identity at the present moment. I have done this for 5 years. I also volunteered as a counselor at Girl Scout camp for 17 years and volunteered as a counselor at a summer camp for kids affected by HIV and AIDS. The good news is that HIV and AIDS is treatable. The bad news is it's still prevalent, which people may not be aware of. I really have a passion working with kids. I'm super grateful I mustered the courage to be my authentic self. It was like a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders when I came out as female. So now at the beginning of my journey. My trauma first happened at a very young age. I was severely physically and sexually abused by my parental male. To this day, I refuse to call him my father. The abuse started when I was about 4 and continued until I was at least in my mid-teens. According to the theory of structural disassociation, a person is not born with a core personality. A child doesn't have a fully formed core personality or identity until between the ages of 6 and 8. So if severe trauma happens prior to the formation of a core identity, a child may disassociate during part of the traumatic events. If this happens, the child's identity will remain fragmented for the rest of their lives. As a consequence, the child may develop what is called dissociative identity disorder, or DID for short. This disorder used to be referred to as multiple personality, but this isn't entirely accurate. It's still called multiple personality, actually probably more often than DID from my experience. But a person who has DID actually has 2 or more separate distinguishable identities that share the same body. These identities are completely different people, each with their own unique characteristics. Now, since personality is one component of identity, people who have DID also have multiple personalities. I'm saying this because I have DID. I'm not sure how many identities I have, since some can go dormant and I can become co-conscious of new ones at any time. By co-conscious, I mean that I'm aware of that identity, what they may look like, what that person may look like, and what their behaviors they have. People who have DID typically refer to their identities as parts, alters, or multiples, or headmates. Personally, I refer to my identities as my internal family members because that's how I see them. The younger family members who front most are a 6-year-old girl, a 16-year-old boy, and a 17-year-old girl. By front, I mean they're out. I also have a family member who we call our protector. There's several more as well, which I won't describe here. I would say probably have on the order of about 20 of them, but that's highly variable. Some family members have aged along with me and some have not, like the 6-year-old and the teenagers. They have remained at their same age when they were first formed. DID is basically a coping mechanism and survival tool to deal with trauma that would have been too overwhelming for one person to handle. Family members hold parts of the trauma or have no trauma at all. I can say without a doubt that I wouldn't still be here if I didn't have DID. Anyway, that's sort of DID 101. DID is one of the most misunderstood disorders there is. Many people, including some mental health professionals, don't believe it's an actual disorder, and people who have it are just making it up. TikTok is full of fake videos about DID. But DID is an actual disorder that's listed in the DSM-5-TR, which is the most recent version of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders clinicians use to diagnose a client with a specific disorder. My aspiration with working with my DID was to constantly improve our communication with each other. Communication could be through many different modes. It could involve verbally speaking to one another, or it could involve internal dialogue. Alternatively, communication could be through journaling, visual art, poetry, spoken word, or music. Each family member has their own journal they can choose to keep private, or they can share it with whomever they want. Through constructive communication, we can hopefully learn to love each other unconditionally and support each other. And as a minimum, tolerate each other. Just like in a traditional family, things work better when we're all civil with each other and respect each other as the wonderful human beings we are deep down inside, in spite of some of our maladaptive behaviors we may have. Just by itself, DID is a very challenging disorder to live with on a daily basis. However, we also have several comorbid, or what they call multiple disorders. I say we because some family members may have one or more disorders, while others have a different disorder or disorders. In all, we have 12 mental health and neurological disorders, diagnosis for 12 of them. These being complex PTSD, bipolar disorder, anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia, schizotypal personality, and psychosis. Even when I say this, I feel like I'm exaggerating, but trust me, I'm not. It's in my medical chart. How these diagnoses came about was when I was hospitalized. On multiple occasions, several different family members fronted and showed symptoms of a disorder that fit the criteria for a particular disorder. I've been seen by many psychiatrists and therapists. Identity switches usually occur in response to a stress or trauma trigger, which happened a lot during my hospital stays because we felt very unsafe in hospital settings. So there was a lot of switching, so clinicians got to see different family members. Regardless, I'm not concerned about what disorders I have at this point anymore. What I need to work on is managing the symptoms of these disorders to lessen the impact on our daily life. Although all these disorders are challenging in themselves, without a doubt, I would say that the two most challenging are my DID and schizophrenia with accompanying psychosis, since I happen to have these disorders. And I'm what we call the host, since I'm the person who fronts the most. Of course, we all have DID. Living with these disorders has caused me to not have stable employment, stable housing, consistent insurance, or healthy and stable relationships, both platonic and romantic, nearly all of my life. When people witness me suddenly start acting like a totally different person or have a disconnect from reality during a psychotic episode, they can become extremely uncomfortable or downright terrified of me. This can cause all the issues I just mentioned. Okay, now for the best part, my trauma recovery journey. Like my concept of time, this is not at all linear. I just don't think in a linear way in any method. It's been a process that continues to this day. To me, the healing process is a journey without a destination. The healing occurs during the journey. There is no point where I will be cured or my symptoms will permanently go away. That's my personal opinion and the opinion of most medical experts. There's no cure for DID or any other disorder as well. Again, like I said, the best thing I can do is learn how to manage my symptoms. Based on how much trauma I had, I was a hot mess as a child. I think that's an understatement. There was complete denial in my bio family, and my male parental figure told me over and over again that he would literally beat the shit out of me if I ever told anybody about what happened. So I was terrified of him. I was frequently subjected to gaslighting by him, so much so that I actually thought the trauma was my fault and I deserved what I got. I believed that for a long part of my childhood. That's what abusers can do. As a result of being neurodivergent, and which I'll go into a little bit later, not too much, as a result of being neurodivergent and being an emotional train wreck, I was horribly bullied as a child. I was so different. I was bullied at school, in my neighborhood, etc., etc. And as a coping mechanism, I was so terrified of people that I decided to not even speak, because if I spoke, that would have made bullying worse. So I did not speak a word to anybody except my immediate family till I was 18. Not that I couldn't. It was just it was just what I thought was best. Was it? I don't know. That was a long time ago. When I first left home, I was determined to be self-sufficient, though, because when I left at 18, I had no desire to ever come back. I mean, I ran away from home so many times, but I had to come back because I was not street smart. I really didn't have any way to take care of myself. So I got a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering, got a high-paying job, got married, bought a house, and adopted a child. But for a long time, I was in complete denial of how my past trauma affected me. I literally became an unpaid professional actor who pretended I had it all together. I think I should have been nominated for an Academy Award, since several people told me during that time that they thought I was the most together person they ever met. Boy, was that ever a lie. But I must have done a good job of presenting as I had it all together. But I don't regret this, because this was all I knew at the time. I didn't have any techniques about trauma recovery. I had no idea. I didn't even know what PTSD was. And it seemed to work for a long time until it didn't. The stress of repressed emotions began to take its toll, and cracks began to form in my facade. My first involuntary hospitalization was due to a psychotic episode when I was 23, long time ago. During the hospitalization, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. In fact, I had to agree to hospitalization as opposed to a long jail sentence, because I was arrested for assaulting a police officer because they came after me during the psychotic episode, which is not the correct thing to do when someone's in a psychotic episode, to come at someone aggressively. That's just not what's recommended. But even then, I did nothing to process my trauma. I was still, at 23, I had no desire to seek help with therapy. I still thought, oh, well, that's an aberration. I was an alcoholic for 20 years, and there were frequent involuntary hospitalization and multiple suicide attempts. During some of our hospital stays, a family member could become violent, and we had to be restrained and forcibly sedated, which did nothing but re-traumatize some of us. My experience in psychiatric hospitals, not just my experience, I don't want to say they're good or bad. Some are probably better than others. Mine were absolutely horrible, which is kind of sad. But of course, I was in the ones that were severe, and they were just trying to stabilize you to release you. That was for your safety. I was married and for 37 years in a relationship with what I now know was a narcissist that turned physically and sexually abusive for many years. And it became like I was reliving my childhood trauma during the marriage. And I've had some people say, well, you can't be sexually abused or raped when you're married. I disagree. I believe you can if it's not consensual. That's my opinion. All I knew at the time were relationships that were manipulative and abusive, including platonic relationships. It took me quite a while to know what a healthy relationship looked like, in which proper boundaries were set. I never learned how to set boundaries as a child, or had no adult role models so that I could see what a healthy relationship was like. I mean, I had no clue what a healthy relationship was like until I was much older. I became a people pleaser, since it was a coping mechanism to deal with my trauma, and I allowed myself to be manipulated in all of my relationships, since people saw me as someone who could be easily manipulated. I had a target on my forehead, pick me, I can be manipulated. People can read that. I learned that later. But still, even after all that, I was stuck so much in trauma and victimhood that I still did nothing to process or heal from my trauma. However, it took my ex-wife threatening to kill me with a knife to start my recovery journey. That's what it took. And in a kind of a weird way, that's probably the best thing that ever happened to me. I certainly didn't think so at the time, or even a few years afterwards. That was about 4 or 5 years ago. But I left and never looked back. Best thing I ever did. My idea of narcissists is they're manipulative. They have absolutely no empathy, and they just use and abuse people for their own basic needs. But since my ex was the breadwinner, I had no financial resources and was homeless and living in my car for over a year. And I was still stuck in survival mode. But I decided to start working with a trauma-informed therapist and started doing inner work required to start healing. I'm so grateful I started doing this, but it has no means been easy. Because I would say now AA didn't work for me. I did try it, but I have been sober since I adopted my daughter. I've been sober for 25 years, and I'm proud of that. Because I did not want my daughter to be raised in an alcoholic family. I absolutely did not. That was my impetus to stop. I just stopped. I didn't go to AA or anything like that. But I do believe in the concept of rock bottom. And I think my ex-wife threatening to kill me was my rock bottom. So I call it rock bottom when the emotional pain and suffering is just too overwhelming to handle. So when I hit rock bottom, I felt like I had two choices: either to get help and try to get better, or to do something that made it impossible not to get better, and that would have been suicide. The first thing I needed to do to get better, was to reframe my negative core beliefs and recognize any cognitive distortions we had, such as the world is a dark and scary place and that all people are evil and can't be trusted. Sure, there are some people who aren't very nice, but most people are. But that was a cognitive distortion I had based on my past trauma. These negative core beliefs and cognitive distortions are an impediment to healing. I used to blame myself for my trauma and thought it was my fault. I had no self-esteem, self-love, or self-compassion. I mean, I would say none. I thought I was a horrible person. And I thought I was a mistake. One thing my male parental figure told me that stuck with me to this day is I didn't go by Rainbow then. I went by Tony. He said, "Tony, you're just a complete waste of space. You should never have been born." That's a horrible, horrible thing to say to a child. But that stuck with me, and I believed it. Because no matter how abusive my parental figures are, I tended to believe what they say, because I was a child and they were the parent. So reframing my negative core beliefs I had since childhood proved very, very hard to do. It was a time-consuming and labor-intensive process that involved working with a trauma-informed therapist. I also had to work on self-forgiveness, because one thing I did is I had it backwards. I was trying to forgive my abusers, and that's not how it works. The only thing I can do is forgive myself. I can never forgive the actions of my abusers, because there's no way to rationalize what they did. No one, absolutely no one, deserves to be abused in any way at all. I always say love should not hurt. I do try to have empathy for them sometimes, because I now realize that hurt people hurt people. They were suffering too. And that goes with my ex as well. But having empathy for them is not a requirement. Sometimes I just can't. Another thing that helped me was to not judge myself or anyone based on a particular behavior. I believe a person is not defined by their behavior. This applies to me as well, because I had some very, very maladaptive behaviors, but it wasn't who I am. It was just coping mechanisms to deal with trauma. But this was easy to say, but hard to do. But like I say, I'm a work in progress. I continue to evolve and sometimes de-evolve, which is okay as long as it's temporary. It's a part of the nonlinear healing journey. In summary, I had to learn techniques that help with emotional self-regulation so as not to be as frequently triggered by a memory of past trauma due to my PTSD. Or if I do become triggered, it's hopefully not as severe as it was in the past. It's a matter of becoming aware of my emotions and synchronizing my body and mind. So the key for me, again, was the ability to emotionally self-regulate, because I could not do that before. And then I would become stuck in my coping mechanisms would deal with PTSD was fawn and freeze. Fawn is like people pleasing. So I had to, and that was because I would instantly become emotionally overwhelmed. It happened in like a matter of seconds. So if I could learn to stabilize my emotions, the trauma triggers wouldn't be as severe or as frequent. I do feel I'm in a much better place than I was before, but it's still not all rainbows and unicorns. In fact, there have been 2 more suicide attempts this year alone. So I still am struggling somewhat, or more than somewhat. But that's okay. I need to be gentle with myself. I just need to do the best I can possibly do. Plus, I had a recent psychotic episode that has jeopardized my current living situations, which I thought was the first stable housing I had. I'm still here staying at a Buddhist temple. I'm the only one who speaks English here. Everybody else speaks Vietnamese, which is interesting. But the people I'm living with are now quite scared of me. But I do try not to catastrophize, which is something I tend to do. That was a couple of weeks ago, and I'm still here. So maybe I can still stay here because I really don't have another place to go. I can't share a room with somebody. It just never has worked out, and I wouldn't put that burden on somebody because I can still become unstable, and that's just not as good. That's just not good for safety. But I do know the psychotic episode happened, and I do know what it was about because I wanted some proof of how severe my psychosis was. So I went to a class on understanding schizophrenia, and I asked, well, how do you know if you're in a psychotic episode because you're not present? And the person who was a therapist said, well, you can make, if it's an hallucination, you can take a picture. Pictures don't lie. If it's a auditory hallucinations or a psychotic episode, you can make a recording of it. So I actually did that because I'm highly suggestible during a psychotic state, and some of the other family members, or at least one, said, Rainbow, if you make a video of this, you'll know that it's actually happening. I know that was a lie, but I didn't want to make a video of it because I just wanted proof of how bad it was. And it wasn't anything, I won't go into what it was. Well, okay, I'll say it was, and you could redact this if you want, but it wasn't anything severe. I was somehow, it doesn't make sense, but I was looking for a lost cat. And I was very agitated and screaming, which I don't even know why, because obviously it was a psychotic episode. I don't own a cat. But it happened at 3:02 a.m. in the morning, and I was very loud. So the people did not appreciate that. And when they knew that I was just not present in reality, because they know I don't have a cat, they have become scared, and they don't even make eye contact with me or anything else. But as long as I'm here and we don't have to interact, I'm okay with that. And hopefully they are too. Also, still some things have not gone as well as I hoped. Also, my therapist just terminated me for the second and final time. But I do think it's for the best. I mean, we try. I don't think the relationship is salvageable. She, quote unquote, said that I become so unusual that she doesn't know how to talk to me even. And I appreciate her honesty, but if she can't talk, because even the last session, she only said like 5 words. I knew something was not quite correct. So she terminated me, and we decided to part our ways. She said I could check in with her though, still once in a while, but via text or email, because I do have her number. But this was the only therapist that was willing to work with me for an extended period of time. I saw them for about 2 years. I tried 5 therapists before this one, and none of them was willing to work with me. I would get a response along the lines that they don't have the tools to give me the support I need, which may have been true. And lastly, another thing that happened that I would not have wanted to have happen is a former abuser moved into the Buddhist temple that I'm at a few months ago. And that was by design. And the abuse did start back up again. Unfortunately, I remember locking myself in the bathroom here. And that did nothing but re-traumatize me and go back to my past memories of childhood. But overall, I think I'm handling it pretty well now. There was an adjustment because I was not prepared for that. But I've gotten much better at boundary setting. And I just say, I give the person the look now, don't mess with me. And one good thing about the psychotic episodes, I think they're also scared of me. So they leave me alone now, which is kind of good, and kind of ironic, but that's kind of good in a way. Additionally, I have been living with a chronic and incurable neurological condition. I was born with it. It's gotten significantly worse in the last year or so. So my mobility has become severely limited. I've been having frequent seizures, nerve pain, and digestive issues. And the fact that I do not have any health insurance at the present time makes things that much harder. And that would require a long story and why I don't. Well, because I basically moved out of state. I don't want to go into. a long detail of that, but I'm about to lose. I filled my last refills of any prescription meds I need, and I'm about to lose my meds. So I'm trying to work on that if I could at least get my thyroid med, because I do want to keep taking that, but I don't know if that's going to happen. I just don't have a lot of motivation. I know I can apply for insurance in Arizona where I'm living, but I can't muster up the motivation to do that. I also don't know how long I'm going to be staying here. This place was not meant to be permanent. It was just a temporary stay, but I'm not sure. And also having ADHD and autism makes social interaction a challenge. I mean, I have no idea what's going to happen if I go to a social setting, and I don't really go to social settings anymore because of my poor health and because I don't drive anymore. I have frequent seizures. I hope that I can finish this without having the seizures. That can be sometimes a couple times an hour, and they interfere with my sleep because obviously I can't sleep when I'm having seizures, and it's kind of like a catch-22. My seizures keep me awake, and I can't sleep because I'm having seizures. So chronic sleep deprivation makes the seizures a lot worse. And I was on an anti-seizure med for a while, but I lost the ability to get any more refills of that prescription. And so due to my ADHD and autism, I lack the ability to express any emotions through body language. I can be very stoic at times when speaking. I'm purposely trying to vary my vocal tone a little bit so I don't sound so monotone, but it's not natural. I sound like a bot when I talk. Consequently, I sometimes come across as cold, uncaring, and lack empathy and compassion. But that's so not true. I do have empathy and compassion, and I do care about people. I just can't show it as people typically do. So what I learned was to just show people I care through words. People tell me something and like it's something very tragic, and it won't show any emotional reaction through body language, and they think I don't care. So that's still kind of something that happens once in a while. Oh, I was talking about suicide to them, and it was like I was going to the grocery store. They didn't quite get it. So anyway, but I must be doing something right because I made it to 64 last month. I'm no spring chicken anymore. But I continue to have a passion for helping others whenever possible. I do believe that I need to have some kind of life purpose, and that purpose has changed since I don't drive and I don't really go out anymore. So my activities have been online. Thank goodness, in a way, for the pandemic, because things have opened up and things have remained on Zoom, like support groups and a lot of activities that were previously in person. I tutor underprivileged kids who live in disenfranchised communities. I facilitate shadow work sharing circles on an on-demand basis, and I do Reiki energy healing. And I co-facilitate an online support group for people who have DID or OSDD, which stands for Other Specified Dissociative Disorder. OSDD is similar to DID, but does not have an amnesia component to it. To be diagnosed with DID, a person needs to have amnesia during some of the identity switches. And lastly, this is something I never thought I would happen. And this podcast is a never too. So I learned not to say never because I've done a lot of nevers. But I created a space on a Quora platform where I respond to questions about a wide variety of topics, including mental health disorders, neurological conditions, physical disability, transgender issues, and trauma recovery, to name a few. This kind of started by accident when I asked the question, and I kind of liked the responses I got, so I decided to create my own space. And I thought, I don't know if I should do this because nobody is interested in what I have to say. That nobody could ever be interested in. And that was a cognitive distortion that I had to admit it was a cognitive distortion, because I believe I now have 80,000 contact views of my responses. I still can't believe it when I look at the number. I don't want to focus on the number, and I've only been doing this about a year. I mean, I may get upwards of 1,000 content views to one question. Now, I don't really answer. I mean, people ask for advice. I typically don't give advice to people, especially if I don't know them, but I do say what's worked for me and what's worked for some others I know. So the response has been overwhelmingly positive, but like any social media platform, there is the occasional negative comments. I realize that can happen. For example, I was recently told I have a mental illness just because I'm transgender. Now, transgender was classified, and being gay was classified as a mental illness many decades ago, but it's not. They call it transgenderism as a mental disorder, and that's just a negative word. One of my questions, which fortunately was deleted on Quora, I guess they have someone who monitors the responses, was, pardon my French, but what do we do about all the fucking autistics? That was a question. Can you answer that question? I just opened it up to see, and then it says this question has been deleted. So there is someone who is monitoring it. Do want to close by just like to emphasize the importance of having a supportive community when dealing with mental health challenges. My support groups are my community. I do think it's essential because I do have a tendency when things go haywire to self-isolate and withdraw. And sometimes having some space to figure things out is good, but self-isolation for long periods of time, I don't think it's good for my mental health. So I continue on this journey, and it's still a work in progress. And I take things literally. I know it's a cliche, but it's so true. I just take things one day at a time, sometimes 1 hour or some minute at a time. I don't make too much plans in advance. And you wanted to share about the my quote from Brené Brown. So I will do that in a minute, but I also wanted to share a quote that totally resonated with me. Now, it does have a tinge of sarcasm to it, so you're free to redact it if you want, but I think it really resonated with me. It says, courage is knowing it might hurt and doing it anyways. Mental illness is the same thing, and that's why life is so hard. It makes sense to me. I know it's a little bit sarcastic, and I don't want to be disrespectful to mental illness. I don't want to make it a joke, but now the quote, officially the quote did say stupidity is the same thing, but I don't like to use that word because it's so judgmental. So I changed it to mental illness. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I love your story, and I absolutely adore that quote. I think that is amazing. And I do want to hear your Brené Brown quote. However, if you're open to it, I'd love to just ask a couple of questions.
Sure.
Awesome. So your story is amazing. And I guess I've probably known you for about a year, and I can 100% say that you have a ton of empathy and love and compassion to other individuals. And I'm very grateful to have met you and had conversations with you and continually learn from you. I just think you're amazing. If you will send me the information for your online forum, I would love to post that in the show notes so that any listener that wants to can either pull up the show notes and click on the link. What advice would you give to family members and loved ones on how they can be a supportive community to an individual who struggles with some of the same things that you've struggled with?
I have a chosen family. My bio family is not my family, and I have no intention of making them my family, and that's my choice. So I do. It's important to have a family, so I have a chosen family. So I would say, because what I've done, how I was able to provide support is education, trying to end the stigma of talking about it, because it's still so stigmatized. Like I can say, oh, I have a neurological condition. It's a form of muscular dystrophy. And, and people don't usually blink an eye. They might say, I'm so sorry for that. But if I say I have DID or schizophrenia, I get a look like deer in the headlights look. It's just not talked about. So to end the stigma is one thing, and just talk about it. Just talk about it, because what really, really, really breaks my heart is when someone dies by suicide and they really, really wanted to reach out to talk to somebody, whether it be a family member or a loved one, and they just felt like they even sometimes tried to approach the person, and the person they were spurned because the person was too uncomfortable talking about it. And that's just so a shame. So it needs to be talked about. And also educate yourself on what to say and what not to say. Like one thing you don't want to say is, there's a couple things you don't want to say to someone has suicide ideation. Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. I've been told that. That does no good at all. And your loved ones might miss you. How will they feel? Don't do it because they will feel horrible. That puts the onus on the makes then that guilt on the person who's has suicidal ideation. That just doesn't work. I mean, I know that. I know it would be missed, but if I have suicidal ideation, that's not my. I'm not thinking about that. So, and just educate about mental health disorders. DID is so misunderstood. There is information, not a lot about DID. That makes it hard, but there's information online. There's all kinds of webinars about mental health disorders. I mean, I must have gone to 100 webinars about every mental disorder imaginable. What trauma recovery is, how to support someone in trauma recovery, how to become a trauma-informed person, to talk about trauma with somebody, and how to respond if they become triggered. There's so many classes you can take to learn how to talk to somebody if you don't know what to say, because a lot of times it's hard to know what to say. And the last thing I want to say is, if you don't know what to say, just don't say anything. Because I've done it the hard way too. Sometimes I would say something that, oh my gosh, why did I say that? Only because I wanted to say something. So sometimes I have no words to describe what you're going through. I'm here for you. You feel free to reach out. I think it's important to be there for people, but you have to, if they reach out, you have to be there. And you just can't, because I've had people they say, oh, I'm here for you, and they're not. So you have to back up what you say. So that's kind of a long-winded version of what advice I would give to people who are trying to help a loved one or family member dealing with mental illness or mental health challenges.
I love that. That is amazing. I cannot echo enough how important it is to say the right thing. And if you don't know, to just not say anything at all. I know I struggled when I lost my first child, was a son, stillborn. And that was one of the greatest lessons I learned through that journey, was how to sit with someone in silence, sit with someone in their grief, and be able to say, even for example, when I knew other individuals who had lost children, you also don't want to say, I know exactly what you're going through because X, Y, and Z, because every single situation is unique in and of itself. So just because I've struggled with something does not mean I know exactly what somebody else is going through. And from my experience, when individuals have said that to me, it feels very much like my challenges are being minimized by them, as if I somehow don't have a right or an ability to grieve or to struggle or something like that. So never, from my perspective, I would encourage, just never say you know exactly what somebody is going through. I love how you shared how in your education, how you'll share, okay, these are the tools that have worked for me. That's amazing as well, because a whole toolbox is different from one individual to the next. And I think one of the things I love about being able to have this podcast and have guests such as yourself is to provide diversity of different tools that different individuals have utilized and found successful, in hopes that someone's listening to this and maybe they pick up a couple of the things that you shared and it helps them in their healing journey. I can't believe your healing journey is only 5 years. That is just amazing, because how much I know about how knowledgeable you are and where you're at now. I think that is amazing. And I love, what you just said is, it's so much better to say to someone, I don't know what to say. I don't know what you're going through, but I'm here to listen, or I'm here to be a shoulder to cry on, or I'm here to do, and whatever it is you offer that you're here to do, it's so critical that you follow up on it, because that other individual has probably experienced people saying they were there to support them and have not been there. So if you're going to speak up and say you're there to support, then you, by golly, should be there to support. So I love that. That's so amazing. I think I have another question. What advice would you give either to the individual or to their family member as they start getting used to using pronouns that may be different from what they perceived in the past, or they may be different for grammar perspective. I know, here's an example of what I'll say is, I know when I was in trauma treatment, was the very first time I became friends with an individual who has DID, and they use pronouns they, them. And it was so hard for me because in grammar and growing up in English, I would always want to say he or she or whatnot. And I had to constantly. So in the beginning, when I became friends with this individual, I would just say their name instead of a pronoun each time until I got it right. And then every time I screwed up, I just learned it was better for me to say, I am so sorry. What I meant was, their, them, or whatever the pronoun was. So what advice would you give when you made the transition and were able to express your pronouns and the change, or you worked with others? What advice would you give?
Okay, well, that's one good thing about Zoom is I can put my pronouns there. First of all, give people time. It takes time. I mean, I've misgendered myself, believe it or not, and I've misgendered other people. So give it some time. It might take a few months or even a year to start getting the habit of gendering somebody by their pronouns. And even I learned a lesson. I used to say my preferred pronouns, and someone said, well, are those really your preferred pronouns, or are those the pronouns you want used? And I said, well, they're not preferred. Yeah, I don't prefer anything else. It is so. Thank you for clarifying that. They're not preferred pronouns. They are my pronouns. But you said it really good, Ange, too. Like sometimes people get so flustered when they call me the wrong pronoun. They use male pronouns, and it still happens, especially on the phone a lot. I don't know how to avoid that. I wish there was a way to not call somebody sir or ma'am. I try not to do that. There are companies that are really good. Like when I had insurance in Oregon, the first thing they would say is, do you have a name you go by, and what pronouns do you use? They say that at first. That's their introduction. So that just clears everything up. That's how it could be done. I will be called because people don't look at my own pronouns or et cetera, et cetera. So I do get misgendered still on a regular basis by using male pronouns. And I have to be understanding, as long as it doesn't happen repeatedly and intentionally over and over again. I do look like a male, especially from the face up. My face still structure is a more male, so people will automatically go that. But you said it right, Andrew. I misgender somebody or someone else misgenders me. It's just apologize and move on. Don't make a big deal out of it. Don't go on and on about it because it's not a big deal. Like I said, the only time if it's intentional and keep doing it over and over again, and then those people I will cut those people out of my life because there have been some. I mean, when I came out as transgender, I lost many, many people I thought were my friends. Give people time to come along. Give people time to come along, but eventually, if they don't at all make any progress, cut them out. Not so easy to do. And sometimes if you're a minor and you can't do with your parents, that's just not possible. Unfortunately, I've known so many examples of kids who've been kicked out of their house because they're gay or transgender. That is so sad. Give parents time, if you're a minor, to give them some time to get acclimated, because it is hard for a parent. I mean, it was hard for my daughter. It was kind of backwards. That's kind of my advice.
That's amazing. And for our listeners, I wanted to reference two different blog posts that were published on the Recovery Advocate Network website earlier this year. And one this year and one last year that deal with two of these topics that Rainbow has addressed. One is this particular topic in pronouns, and the blog post is entitled They, Them, Us. It was written by Terry, who is the mother of a child who transitioned, and that was published March 30th of 2022. I'll put the link to that blog post in the show notes. And then the other blog post that you may find interest in is one on DID. And a friend of mine, Kathy Jones, wrote a blog post about her experiences with DID that was published on March the 5th, 2023. And it was titled Discovering My Dissociative Identity Disorder and Learning to Thrive with It. So I would encourage listeners to read those two blog posts.
Yeah, I read Kathy Jones's podcast already, and it's quite good. Yeah, it was quite
really good. Yeah, she did amazing. Yes, absolutely. Alrighty. I think a couple of things are, one, I definitely want to hear your motivational quote that keeps you going, and then give you an opportunity to say any parting words to the listeners that you want to make sure they hear.
Okay. So I like Brené Brown because she's very direct and she doesn't mind swearing. I think that's okay in certain contexts. I mean, not all the time, but this is probably my favorite quote by her. I probably have it memorized, but I just want to read it just in case I mess up. The dark does not destroy the light. It defines it. It's our fear of the dark that casts our joy into the shadows. So it's our fear of the dark that casts our joy into the shadows. I want to make sure I say that correctly. And that's Brené Brown. And she has tons of motivational quotes. And I like listening to her. I got to see her on Zoom, a live webinar by her. That was good. So fear, I mean, again, overcoming fear. I think helping to support loved ones is you have to overcome fear, because fear is the tool that could prevent constructive communication.
I love it. That's amazing. I also am a huge fan of Brené Brown. I love her TED Talks. I love, listeners, you can go on YouTube, watch her presentation for her book, Dare to Lead, and Daring Greatly are some of the books. Actually, I think in the background of my bookshelf here, I have some of her books that she is just an amazing. She talks about vulnerability. And I've learned so many life lessons, so many conflict resolution and communication skills from different podcasts that she's done, or not her podcast, but her YouTube. But she does also have a podcast. So I'll put some of those links in the show notes as well. So I'm really, really, really grateful, Rainbow. This has been amazing. Thank you for your time and your vulnerability and your transparency and just walking us through your entire journey. I am very inspired and very grateful.
Yeah, thank you. I believe now in complete honesty. I mean, there's certain things you just don't say in certain situations, and I'm still working on that, to be honest. I believe I have to be honest with myself. That's the most important thing. Because if I'm not honest with myself, I think that's also an impediment to helping others.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I know the listeners are going to love this. I would love at some time in the future to have you back, and maybe we'll talk about a different portion of your journey, or perhaps even look at some of the questions you posted online and read some of those responses and walk through those in a future episode. How does that sound?
Yes, it sounds good. I mean, sharing my story is good. I've become quite comfortable. This is the first time I actually did an audio of sharing my story, but I've shared it on Quora many times. Now I got to do though that again, because you mentioned trigger warnings. My story is out there, and I don't hold back. So it's out there. So just maybe a trigger warning. I have got so many positive responses, and I have got so many responses for thank you so much for helping me see things in a new way that I didn't see before, and that just melts my heart.
Well, thank you so much. We're really grateful. You just listened to episode 7 featuring our guest Rainbow as she shared her story about dealing with sexual identity and comorbid mental health challenges. What an amazing story. I have so much respect for Rainbow and am completely grateful for everything she does for the community. Absolutely amazing. As a reminder, the experiences and advice expressed by these guests are their own stories. Rayanne is passionate about opening the doors for all voices and experiences, not just those expressed in any particular podcast. If you found this or other podcast episodes meaningful, we encourage you to share them on your favorite social network. It also helps if you give us an awesome rating so that we are more likely to pop up when somebody else needs to hear these stories. If you would like to share your experiences or expertise, we encourage you to be a future guest by emailing us at podcast@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org or submit a blog post by emailing blog@recoveryadvocatenetwork.org. Thanks for enjoying your coffee with us as we continue sharing these meaningful conversations together. In case you're wondering, every individual working with Rayanne does so on a 100% volunteer basis. All funds raised go to support the mission. So don't forget to love, not like, our podcast and subscribe. We have quite a few amazing guests booked for future episodes. Trust me, you won't want to miss them. So subscribe today. We hope you will also connect with us at www.recoveryadvocatenetwork.org, where you can donate to the mission, read blog posts, and stay in the loop about upcoming events, including fundraising auctions. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Recovery Advocate Network and on Twitter at Ran to Wellness. If this episode was triggering to you, we encourage you to contact your support system, therapist, national and community support groups, the Global Crisis Text Line by texting 741-741 and/or, if in the U.S., dialing 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. If you wish to provide feedback, please feel free to leave comments on the episode or email us. Now, back to your coffee.